Hey guys, the more that I'm learning about the case of Amanda Lewis, the more I am leaning toward believing that she is guilty. And I want to tell you why. A lot of the people who say that she's innocent basically are trying to discredit the testimony of her son, who was 6 years old when he witnessed her killing her 7-year-old daughter by drowning her in the pool. They say that he changed his stories 13 times. They say that he couldn't even recognize his own mother in the courtroom, so why would they depend on him to remember what happened 6 months before? So I want to just touch on both of those claims. The part about not recognizing his mom in the courtroom, consider how traumatic that would have been for at that point he was 7 years old, for a little 7-year-old boy to be escorted into a courtroom with all those big people and everybody looking right at him, and then being seated up on the stand and expected to answer a lot of different questions. If you're in any type of situation where it doesn't even have to be a traumatic situation, but if it's something that's very stressful, it's quite likely that you'll have tunnel vision, that you'll focus just on what's right before you. I highly doubt that a 7-year-old boy was scanning the courtroom to see if there was anyone in the crowd that he recognized. And let's just say that he did take a look over toward the defendant's table. I think there were 3 or 4 people seated at the table. He wouldn't have looked at each person individually at all. He would have just scanned in that direction, right? And he would have seen 4 big people sitting at the table. And let's just say that he did zoom in on his mother, not expecting his mother to be there, of course, because his understanding was that his mommy was in jail. And he explained that when he was on the stand, that the reason she wasn't in the courtroom was because she's in jail. So that makes sense that in his mind, his mommy was in jail, so he would have never expected to have seen her there. And evidently, he wasn't told that she would be there before they escorted him to the stand. So let's just say he did zoom in on his mother. His mother did not resemble the mother that he knew all of his life. You can look at the photos. She did not look the same. And that's common in all of these cases. If you look at the photos of them before they're arrested and look at the photos of them at their trial, they're often not at all resembling what they used to look like. So I think that's really a faulty argument to say how he couldn't even recognize his own mother. So how can you rely on what he's trying to remember from 6 months ago? I think he had tunnel vision. I think he was focused on the microphone. I think he was focused on reaching the microphone. I think he was focused on the prosecutor because he knew the prosecutor was asking him questions. I think he was focused on remembering to say yes, sir, and no, sir. He was focusing on minding his manners. And he was probably focusing on the fact that all of those big people were staring right at him. And he probably didn't like having all of those big people staring at him, so he probably focused even more on the microphone. On the other point, when they say that he changed his stories 13 times, or there were 13 different versions given of the same story, I don't think that's true. I really don't. And I think the versions that he gave immediately following the drowning are the ones to really pay attention to. He got in the car with his grandpa, or probably a truck, I don't know. But he got in his grandpa's vehicle, and they were together for just 15 minutes. Well, the grandpa picked him up from the house and drove him back to the grandma and grandpa's house. Well, his mom was up at the hospital with his sister. In that 15 minutes, he told his grandpa what he saw. And he said to his grandpa that his mom dunked his sister. And he told him what he saw with his hand over his face, showing how his mother had her hand over his sister's face while she held her head underwater. Then when the grandpa and the little boy got back to the grandpa's house, well, grandpa told grandma what the little boy had said. And then they took the little boy down to the police station, and the police interviewed him, and he said exactly what he saw. And he showed the police officer with his hand how his mama had her hand right over his sister's face while she held her head underwater. His story that he told the police officer was consistent with the story that he told his grandparents. And then he was interviewed again by a person who was specially trained in interviewing children. I think it would have been called the forensics interview. And his story was consistent with what he had told to the police officer and what he had told to his grandparents. Those are the stories that matter. I think the stories that emerged over the next 6 months, including even at the trial itself, may have brought different responses, possibly because of the form of the question. I pointed this out in a different interview, or in a different video, that when, I think it was the defense lawyer, asked the little boy during the trial if his sister was inside the pool or outside the pool, and the little boy answered outside, I think it makes perfect sense that a little boy would be thinking, well, we were outside, as opposed to the specific question, which was asked of whether or not his sister was in the pool or not in the pool. When you're interviewing a child, the words that you use are very important. Children want to please the adult who is interviewing them, which is why it's so important for adults to ask what are called open-ended questions. Because if a child senses what answer you want, then that's probably the answer you'll get. To ask a child whether or not his sister was inside the pool or outside the pool, it fails to consider the little boy's perception of the word outside. Does that make sense? And he is not about to say, well, I don't really understand your question, sir, because you're not being specific and I'm confused about inside or outside. He's going to give the person asking him the question what he thinks the person wants to hear. I think because of the way questioning goes in a trial, it makes it difficult for a child to be able to simply tell people what happened, because, it has to be yes or no or this or that. But even then, even surrounded by all of those adults in a courtroom, with all of those people looking at him. And also, after having his mother pointed out to him, which I don't understand why they did that. I really don't understand why on earth they did that. Because that poor little boy broke down in tears when he saw his mama. But even then, knowing that his mama was right there, he said that his mama drowned his sister. And I believe him.